자, 설날 특집 공포게임, 인디 공포게임인데 다곤이라는 제목의 공포게임이에요. 딱 이 가운데 저 그림만 봐도 알겠지만은 우리 아시는 분들은 다 아시는 그 공포 유명한 공포 소설가죠. 그 러브크래프트의 원작을 해서 만든 공포게임 같은데, 제가 그리고 지금 세팅이 제가 집에서 하는 게 아니고 지금 설날 특집으로 제가 큰아버지 쪽에 이제 와가지고 잠깐 PC방에서 잠깐하는 그런 게임이기 때문에 세팅이 조금 맞지 않아요. 그래가지고 그런 부분, 음성이라던가 그런 부분 맞지 않으니까 양해 부탁드리겠습니다. 어쨌든 그냥 게임 해보죠. 참고로 스팀 게임이고 무료예요. 일단 퀄리티가 제법 있어 보이는데 무료 게임이라 가지고 조금 놀라웠네요. 무료 게임인데 이렇게 퀄리티가 있는 거를 무료로 냈다니. 다곤은 스토리와 분위기에 초점을 맞춰 HP 러브크래프트가 쓴 원작을 인터액티브 형식, 상호작용이죠. 인터액티브 상호작용 형식으로 충실하게 각색한 게임입니다. 이 게임에서는 어려운 선택을 강요받거나 행동 순서나 보관함을 관리할 필요도 없으며 게임 내 이동은 간단히 주어진 이야기에 따라 각 장소를 옮겨가는 선에서 이루어집니다. 와, 정말 저를 위한 게임이네요. 제가 제일 싫어하는 공포 게임, 항상 누누이 여러분들한테 말씀드리지만 키 찾는 게임, 열쇠 찾는 게임, 뭐 물건 찾는 게임, 퍼즐 푸는 거, 길 찾는 거, 그런 게임 정말 싫어하거든요. 공포게임, 그런 공포게임 정말 싫어해가지고 일단 여기 써있는 설명만 보고 말씀드리자면은 정말 저한테 최적화된 게임이긴 해요.
I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more.
상호작용 요소를 만나게 됩니다. 알겠습니다. 뭔가를 찾으면 된다 이건가? 일단 게임이 상당히 심플한 것 같아요.
And at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death.
아, 이렇게 뜨는군요. 이런 걸 눌러서 상호작용을 할 수 있다는 건가? 와, 근데 이거 공포게임답지, 이게 뭐냐, 무료 공포게임답지 않은 놀라운 퀄리티인데요. 어쩌다가 우연스럽게 발견해서 하게 됐는데 퀄리티가 상당한데, 이 정도면.
It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation. So that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners.
그렇구만. 일단은 화살표로 움직이는 건 아니고 포인트 앤 클릭 형식으로 움직이고 있네요.
Indeed was the discipline of our captors that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings.
근데 그래픽이 진짜 이거 공포 게임, 무료 공포 게임 답지 않은 수준인데?
Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight.
대책 없이 한마디로 한마디로 그냥 대책 없이 도망쳤다 그런 거네요.
The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land.
물도 다 떨어졌겠다.
But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue.
지금 힘의 주인공이 배를 너무 오래 타가지고 지쳐가지고 그냥 쓰러져서 그냥 하늘만 하염없이 그냥 보고 있는 그런 상황 같죠.
The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous.
여기 보면 타이라니드들이 이렇게 쫙 있는데? 근데 그래픽이 진짜 이거 이렇게 대단한 수준의 그래픽 수준의 게임을 나름 또 한글 패치도 해가지고 완성도 있게 만들었는데 이거를 무료로 이렇게 풀었다고? 와, 이분들 뭐 이부 제작사들 뭐 부처님인가? 왜 이게 해자야?
When at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished. For there was in the air, and in the rotting soil, a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish, and of other, less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence.
소설 문체가 정말로 까다롭고 복잡하기로 유명한
There was nothing within
작가죠.
hearing and nothing in sight save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths.
그러니까 지금까지 스토리를 요약하자면 주인공은 해적선에서 지금 주인공은 일단 현재 시점에서 주인공은 이제 미쳐가지고 자살하기 직전인데 과거 시점으로 돌아가서 자기의 이야기를 좀 들려주자면은 해적선에 잡혔는데 해적선에서 어떻게 탈출해서 작은 보트 하나에 타서 망망대해를 건너다가 갑자기 화산 폭발로 인한 지각 변동이 일어나서 아주 먼 고대의 어떤 일부 해저 지형이 해저 지역 위에 이렇게 떠오르게 됐다 이런 거 같죠.
So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, straining my ears as I might. Nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things.
그렇네. 뭐 아무것도 없네요.
For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for travelling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the
일단 게임 진행 방식은 정말 너무 저의 마음에 좋네요. 마음에 드네요.
The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal.
그냥 뭐 찾아서 그냥 클릭만 하면은 다 진행이 되니까 그거 진짜 저한테 최적화된 게임이네요. 그건.
All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert.
그래픽이 진짜 좋은데? 이렇게 좋은 그래픽을 공짜로 내놓았다고?
That night I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it.
별게 다 있네. 어쨌든 계속 뭐 갈 곳이 없으니까 이 주인공 친구 그냥 계속 앞으로 전진하고 있어요.
By the fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance.
이 정도면 언덕이 아니라 산 아니야?
An intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again.
뭘 받기에 잠에서 깼을까? 그걸 나한테도 좀 보여줬으면 좋겠는데 말이죠.
And in the glow of the moon, I saw how unwise I... Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence. I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley, ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent.
아니 이 친구 이상한 구멍, 말도 안 되는 시면의 구멍을 발견했는데 그 구멍에서 엄청난 공포가 느껴진다고 말하고 있는데 그런 상황에서 구태여 내려가겠다고 말하는 이 주인공의 멘탈, 어떻게 보면 용감하다라고 할 수 있지만은 제가 보기에는 그냥 지 죽을 자리를 지가 알아서 찾아가는 그런 느낌이네요. 아니 그래도 뭐 아니 구태여 뭐 이상한 데를 내려가서 구멍에 들어간다.
I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps, where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me, an object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon.
저 뭐야?
That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself. But I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express. for despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures.
뭐 어쨌든 이 주인공 친구 계속 돌아다니면서 이상한 곳을 계속 돌아다니다가 마침내 또 이상한 걸 또 발견했어요.
The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did
스토리텔링 방식을 지니고 있습니다.
plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a doré. I think that these things were supposed to depict, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some of their face, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint.
이 주인공 친구 뭐 감수성이 아주 뛰어난 것 같아요. 뭐 그냥 그림 따위인데 이걸 보고 떠올리는 것만으로도 혼자랄 것 같은 공포를 느낄 것 같다고 하는군요.
Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, glassy, bulging eyes. Curiously enough, for one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange sight, but in a moment decided that they were some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it.
I saw it. 뭘 봤다는 걸까? 뭐 물속에서 뭔가 움직이고 있죠. 와, 혼자 있는데 만약에 저런 걸 발견하면은 좀 지리긴 하겠네요.
With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Like and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember. I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing.
별로 그렇게 대단해 보이진 않는데 뭐 주인공 입장에서는 엄청나게 무시무시한 괴물이었나 봐요.
distinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given of any land upheaval, nor did I deem it necessary to Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god.
다곤 또는 다간은 주신으로 풍요와 작물 어쩌고저쩌고 저쩌고를 관장하는 고대 신으로 중동 지역에서 숭배를 받은 신입니다. 아카드의 통치자들은 다곤을 정쟁과 정복의 수호신으로 여기기로 했습니다. 다곤은 아시리아 신문에서는 죽은 자들의 심판자로 등장했으며 바빌로니아 문헌 중 한 곳에서는 지옥의 간수로 묘사합니다. 히브리어로 다그가 물고기를 의미하기에 다곤의 이름을 잘못 해석하여 종종 물고기의 신으로 오해를 받곤 합니다. 러브크래프트가 쓴 작품 내에서 다곤은 바다에 사는 물고기처럼 생긴 깊은 곳에 존재를 다스리는 해저신으로 다곤 밀교라 불리는 비밀 집단의 숭배를 받고 있습니다. 다곤이라는 게 실제 있는 건데 그것도 러브크래프트가 자기 소설에서 인용을 했나 보네요. 좀 창작을 했나 봐요, 거기다가.
But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries. It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see that I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient cessation. So now I am to end it all. Often, a mere freak of fever, as I lay sun-stricken and raving. This I ask myself. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows, of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium.
근데 뭐 생긴 게 약간 조금 젖박같이 생겨가지고 그냥 미군이 다 이겨버릴 것 같은데, 아무리 생각해도. 세계 최강대국 미군인데 겨우 저렇게 생긴 애들이 온다고 뭐 할 수 있나?
The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God, that hand! The window! The window!
오, 괜찮았는데 엄청 괜찮았어요. 약간 게임이라기보단 약간 조금 소설을 읽는 듯한 느낌이긴 했는데 이런 퀄리티의 게임을 무료로 낸다는 게 참 대단한데. 근데 좀 전반적으로 쭉 읽어보니까 이 게임을 좀 해보니까 스토리상으로 봤을 때 저 다곤이 오히려 억울한 입장 아니야? 그냥 쟤는 그냥 간만에 그냥 갑자기 자기 살던 심해의 집이 갑자기 화산 활동 때문에 갑자기 해수면 위로 밖으로 갑자기 나와가지고 그것만 해도 일단 짜증난데 갑자기 그냥 나가서 소리 한번 질렀다고 그냥 지나가던 이상한 외부인이 그걸 보더니 갑자기 지 혼자 미쳐가지고 그냥 자살하는 스토리잖아. 다곤 입장에서는 억울한데 그냥 아무것도 안 했잖아 걔는. 어쨌든 뭐 아주 괜찮은 게임이었어요. 다른 게임도 한번 또 해봐야겠다. 정말 괜찮은데. 일단은 여기까지 해보겠습니다. 취지.